Assalamualaikum. Today we are going to discuss verbal and non-verbal communication. In the previous class, we discussed what is communication. Communication is actually the act of transforming information from one person to another. In the previous class, we also discussed the components of communication. So today we are going to go ahead with uh, with the verbal and non-verbal communication. There are two types of communication. One is verbal communication and one is non-verbal communication. Verbal communication is the communication that is done through words and through spoken or written communication, which is verbal. Verbal communication consists of speaking, listening, writing, and reading, which encompasses all the verbal communication. It takes place through face-to-face conversation or group discussion or counseling or interviews, keeping in mind that written communication is not the complete part of the verbal communication, right? It is mostly done through oral communication, that comes in verbal communication, right? Process of exchanging information between two or more people through written or oral communication. Now, um, for example, I'm writing on the board and you people are sitting in front of me, and then I start explaining it to you. This is the verbal communication. So verbal means where the words are used, right? Where the use of words are there. So that's verbal communication. It is done through verbal communication. In there are two types of verbal communication. One is oral communication and the other is written communication. The advantages of oral communication, you already know what is oral communication and written communication. Oral communication is in which we do not have writing involved, whereas in oral communication it's mostly done through spoken, where you are speaking and the other person is listening. So speaking and listening is involved in that. Reading may also include in oral communication. Written communication is where you are actually writing the communication, which is read by the other person. Reading is like the decoder is going to read the message, not listen to the message. This is the difference between oral communication and written communication. The advantages are that it is more personal and informal way of communication. Oral communication, it's more personal and informal. So for example, um, uh, for example, when you are talking to when you have something to say to the teacher, or when you have something to say to your parents, it's not necessary that you will write an application for that. Directly, it's personal and informal way of communicating with your parents. You need to go for oral communication. It makes an immediate impact. That is, oral communication has is more emotional and is more powerful as compared to written communication as well as to non-verbal communication, because it has very immediate impact on the other person, because you can obviously face to face is more expressive when it comes to communication. So it is more immediate and you can defend yourself. It provides opportunity for interaction and feedback, which is defending yourself. That is, when someone has said something and they have misunderstood your message, you can instantly defend yourself, you can instantly give feedback, you can instantly correct them, you can at the same moment, suddenly at that point, can give response to the other person. This is something which is an advantage. Even you can receive response at the same time. So for example, if I have to ask a question and you send a query on sorry, if you have to ask a question and you send a query on LMS, obviously I'm going to see it after an hour, 2 hour, 3 hours. So this is something which is through written communication, right? So it is more it would take time, whereas if I was, if we were in face to face class, you would instantly ask a question and instantly get a feedback. So this is the advantage of oral communication. It is very fast and non-expensive. This is another point in oral communication, and that is it's very fast and non-expensive, which I've already explained it to you. It is not expensive because if you are communicating through written communication. So it's going to require pen, it's going to require paper, it's going to require even if you're sending a text message through a phone, you need a phone for that. You require a phone for that, which is very expensive. However, when it comes to oral communication, face-to-face communication, you go to the person and directly talk to them. However, there is this one point that if, for example, the person is far away, let's suppose the person is in England, then how are you going to communicate it to them as face to face? So in that case, then emails are less expensive than face to face communication. So you have to keep this tiny point there in your mind. Help us to foster better relationships with your coworker and friends. It's very true. If you have face to face communication, if you have not seen someone, and if you have only communicated with them through text messages, or if you have only communicated with them through emails, it's comparatively very difficult for them to form relationship with them. So for them with you, and for you with them, right, it's difficult to form relationships. So face-to-face communication, because it has more impact, therefore it has you can have better relationships with the person, with people. It helps to foster, it is used to inform, inquire, argue, and discuss topic of all kinds. A good point with oral communication is that you can say and do anything. When it comes to oral communication, you can talk about any topic when it comes to oral communication. However, it's completely different when it comes to written communication. You have to think, you have to write, you have to form the message properly. And in oral communication, it's not difficult. You can communicate about anything. So it's more easy to go ways of communicating. Disadvantages is that a word once uttered is that is, it cannot be taken back. So um, if you are communicating with the other person, and it's something that you cannot take back, once said, it won't come back. And that's why it creates misunderstandings. It can be forgotten easily. So there is this disadvantage of proof. um, like the other person may forget and may say that no, you didn't say this to me, or maybe just disagree with what you have said, because they might say that you haven't said it. So therefore there is this disadvantage of it, that it has no legal evidence, it cannot be used as evidence. And for that, it has no longevity, means you cannot keep it for a longer period of time. However, in comparison with oral communication, written communication can be kept for a longer period of time. When you write something, it's with you forever. For example, you people take screenshots of messages, they are always with you. But when it comes to face to face communication, it's very difficult to have a record of it, because you need to record it for keeping it as an evidence. And recording may, you don't know at what time the person may say something which which can be used as a legal evidence. So you might miss recording something, because every in oral communication, everything happens in spur of moment. So you have this difficult situation regarding evidences. So when we buy a property, we don't say it through words, we write it down. So it is important that you should have it in proof with your self. Non-verbal communication without using any spoken or written word, it's non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication is without words, and it takes place in the form of gestures, facial expressions, eye contact, and touching. Now, for example, if someone is expressing themselves, you might have seen, if someone gets angry, they gives a slap, right? Uh, or they start fighting without using any words. Now, this is non-verbal communication. Whereas there are certain people who would start using abusive language. that is verbal. Now, when with its communication can go both at the same time. Verbal and non-verbal can both go at the same time, because when you are communicating through verbal communication, at the same time non-verbal communication might go side by side, because when you're communicating face to face, that is through oral communication, you are actually using expressions as well. You have face gestures as well. So if you're happy, you're smiling, and the person may see that the person is smiling. If you are embarrassed, you might not have any eye contact with the person, or if you're angry, you might hit the other person. So this is how it's done. It also includes the pitch of the voice, speech, tone, and volume of the voice, dresses, and appearances. They all come in nonverbal communication. We say that you communicate through your dressing. When you wear when you wear a very neat and tidy dress, you're trying to communicate something. When you are presenting for like if you're presenting in front of the class, that day you come prepared, not come prepared verbally, but you also come prepared, your dressing and your appearance as well. The way you want the other person to take you, that's how you dress yourself. If you want to dress yourself as if you dress yourself as someone who's someone who's very stylish, you have your own ways. Someone in foreign countries, you might know the word hippie. For example, they have these tattoos, and they have different piercing on their tongue, and nose and ear and eyebrows. You'd see that the kind of verbal this is non-verbal communication through which they are communicating that we belong to this group. Same is the case with pitch, speech, tone, and volume of the voice. If you're angry, your pitch would be high. If you're angry, your tone would be high. You'll have intonation, rise and falling of the tone. You'll be loud. You'll shout. If you're angry, if you're happy, you're still shouting. But there are different ways of expressing this non-verbal communication. Okay, what are the advantages of non-verbal communication? It helps to communicate with someone who is hard of hearing or deaf, which is brings us to the sign languages. So sign languages is one of the way of communicating, one of the ways of communicating, and it helps in communicating with the people who cannot hear you. And or maybe if not, it's not necessary that the person is deaf. Maybe the person is standing far far away, and he's looking at you and is unable to understand what you're saying because you're far away. You can make them understand through gestures, right? You're waving them goodbye, they understand that you're waving them goodbye because you're going. So if you're calling them to come, there is a way to call them from far away through gestures. So these are the different ways in which you communicate. It helps in to communicate in silent zones where you are not supposed to speak. For example, in a classroom, when you want to speak to your class fellow, but obviously the teacher is there, so you try to communicate in non-verbal ways. How to communicate? It helps in communicating with a distant person, which I've already explained. It help us to communicate with people who don't understand our language. So like for example, I gave you the example of a Chinese person in the previous class. So if there's a Chinese person and you want to talk to the Chinese person, so obviously you don't know Chinese and they only know Chinese language. So what you do is you try to explain it to them in the form of non-verbal communication through gestures. Culturally, the non-verbal gestures are culturally determined. Culturally determined means that only people in that culture would be able to understand it. There is this very different ways of people who meet. Like for example, Indians have this namaste. Like if you join these two hands together, And over here in our Pakistani culture, it means forgive us, right? Or we are sick of you, so just leave me. But in India, it is considered as as a gesture of greeting. Here in Pakistan, we greet people through handshakes, and or in here in foreign countries, they hug each other. And in here in this uh, most Arabic countries, they even men greet each other by giving a kiss on the cheek. So there are different ways of non-verbal ways of meeting in different cultures, and they are culturally determined. It captures feelings and emotions through nonverbal communication. You can easily express emotions, which I have already discussed in detail when I was discussing nonverbal communication with you. Okay, disadvantages. You cannot it cannot be used as a public tool of communication unless and until it is in the schools of these sign languages, where sign languages are taught. So formally can be used over there, but the rest you cannot use it as a public language. It's not possible. It cannot create an impression upon people and listeners. Even if you use non-verbal communication, because mostly people do not speak do not understand all the language, so it may not have impact. It can be used to increase the impact of the verbal communication, but it cannot be used completely for non-verbal, completely for the communication. Misperception of body languages or gestures. You might consider some gestures as something which they are not. So, misperception is possible of the body language or gestures. Maybe you don't know the gesture in some other country, and you might consider it as something else, and that is why it creates a problem. So, a single body language may not be sorry, a single body language may not be same everywhere. So, there is a proper way of sitting. For example, when our elders enter home, we all get up. All the youngsters get up, because that's how we give respect to our elders. It might be completely different in other regions, and it might lead to misperception, and it might lead to misunderstandings. So if you don't get up, they'll call you someone who has no etiquettes, but it might be completely different. So there are different types of nonverbal communication. It is facial expressions, gestures, body languages, and postures, and eye contact. So facial expressions are those expressions which are related to the like making faces. These are the facial expressions. Gestures are also related to the expressions, like for example, you raise your eye, you wink. All these are the gestures. Facial expressions may include smile, things like that. Body language and posture. There are certain postures in which you can stand and which you cannot stand. For example, when you are presenting, you cannot keep your hand in your pockets. This is inappropriate. When you're presenting, there are certain postures for females in which they can stand, and certain postures for men in which they can stand, and would seem very inappropriate if the female is standing in an inappropriate position, or body posture, or if the male is standing in inappropriate body posture positions. So there are certain ways in which you stand, you walk, and there are certain body, like you have certain body language postures that you have when it comes to uh, when it when it comes to nonverbal communication. Eye contacts is also one of the ways, like for example, if the teacher is scolding you, and at that time you make eye contact with the teacher, constant eye contact with the teacher, it is considered as something which is misbehaving with the teacher. However, if you constantly gaze down, it is considered as something that you are, you are feeling guilty or embarrassed of what you have done. So this is something, a sign that you're apologetic towards what you have done. So these are the different types of nonverbal communication. Types of non verbal communication is a form of communication in which you use words to interchange the information with the other person. But nonverbal communication does not use words or for communicating anything. But there are some other modes that can be used for the communication. So in these all the above all the above mm, points that were discussed, maybe in non-verbal communication you may say that these some pictures may also include in non-verbal communication, like the way you communicate with the other person, like it can be possible. I hope you have understood the difference between verbal and non-verbal communication, and the way the types of verbal and non-verbal communication. Thank you.